We live in a fantasy world now. Reality has been destroyed.
This is the time that you really need to pay attention.
The probabilities are overwhelmingly on gold's side. That is the best environment to see gold increase its value.
Welcome to Palisade's Gold Radio. I'm your host, Tom Bodrovics. Joining me today is Chris Irons, host of the Quoth the Raven podcast and author of QTR's Fringe Finance Substack. Chris, how are you today? Thanks for joining me, man.
What's up, buddy? It's been a long time.
I feel like I always do say that, but you know, it's always good to chat with you because you and I kind of go everywhere, and it's always interesting because you know, you and I were discussing this idea this morning of how much news flow there really is right now. How many things there are to try and pay attention to try and keep up with, and having these discussions and kind of bouncing these ideas back and forth. You know, we need other people. We need, 3-4 sets of eyes to be able to just try and keep up with all of what's happening.
Yeah, what's nice is I found, and we're literally just continuing our discussion we were having off air, but what I've found is when I find somebody that I like to listen to, for example, James Lavish. I don't know if you've ever had him on your show, but does a very good, meticulous job of explaining in simple speak that pretty much everybody can understand the U.S. debt crisis. And just an easy to understand voice when it comes to laying all that out to people that may not understand how the entire macroeconomic machine works. And so what I'll do is I'll take his name and I'll just plug it into Apple Podcasts, and I'll see like where he's been on, and I'll kind of follow people around as they do their guest spots on different podcasts. A lot of what they say is repetitive if you listen in a close time frame, but if you check in like once every 6 months, I haven't figured out a way to like zero that in on Apple Podcasts so that I get like alerts when they come on. But between that and then, you follow a couple of great hosts that can deliver an interview the way that you want to hear it. And then from there, you can kind of sometimes pick up new people and then go ahead and follow like Rich Roll. He's not a finance guy at all, but I'm a runner. I know that you're an athlete as well. And I like listening to Rich Roll, not just because I like listening to the topics, because he's in recovery and because, I don't drink alcohol anymore, and because he's a runner and because I like to run. He's just got a nice, gentle, calm delivery. And so sometimes I'll listen to somebody that I know on his podcast, like Gabor Mate, who I really like, and then it'll bleed over into another podcast of his where, he can kind of usher in a new guest for me. So you really do have to kind of, stick with the hosts that you like Palisades. When you put up a new episode, I listen to it immediately because I know that the guest that you're going to bring on is going to be interesting to me. It's somewhat in my echo chamber, Yeah. And you have a great delivery where you let guests speak, and you don't you have a very nice kind of out of the way of interviewing where you can just prompt people. I listen to your thing with Peter Schiff. He may be the only person on earth that likes to talk more than I do. And, you ask one question and then just back the fuck up for an hour, and then step in, ask another question, then back the fuck up for another hour. So, I've come to like your style, and, but yeah, they're everywhere. Now I was just joking with you. Democrats have discovered that podcasts are a thing now. And it's right about the time that I'm shutting my podcast down. I'm doing almost everything of mine exclusively on Substack now. Mm-hmm. But just kind of funny to see Gavin Newsom picking it up now. Oh, people listen to these? It's like, dude, the fuck you been the last 20 years, man? Come on. Well, it speaks to the Democrats in general, and just how how behind the eight ball they are in just being at the margin with trends. And, you see these TikToks and stuff that they put out trying to reach for that younger audience, trying to reach for the social media audience. And they do nothing but just produce massive cringe. And meanwhile, Trump's team was, during the campaign, not only was he on every podcast of consequence, Andrew Schultz and Theo Vaughn and Joe Rogan and all these people, but with the memes and shit, kind of some of it's kind of like, you could say, unbecoming of a presidential campaign. But on the other hand, I find myself just laughing a lot too. And so, that's something that you can't fake. I think that harkens back to policies too with them. Like, the Democrats are kind of, JD Vance said this in an interview, like looking to protect just like bad ideologies. And the Republicans have not perfect, but in my opinion, better ideologies and values. So it's easier to protect them because you don't have to lie about as much shit. There's not as much to remember. You just find something, you stick by it, and you defend it. And there's no focus group involved trying to figure out, like, who am I going to offend the least with this? Where, that's kind of the campaign Democrats ran and probably why they lost. So how's that for an answer to a completely unrelated question?
Well, it's perfect because that's the value of these long form conversations, is the ability to go anywhere and really unearth the nuance in a lot of these different realms. Like, it's kind of funny. I was at a conference recently, for example, and somebody was asking like, "Oh, aren't you going to be doing any interviews at this conference?" And I just thought about it for a second, and I was just like, "Not at all. I had no ideas and no preparation to come here and actually interview people, because this is not my particular style of only having 15 minutes to sit down with somebody, rather than, being able to take the time to really get into a solid discussion where we have the time to discover and really follow any of these rabbit holes."
Yeah, I never understood that at those conferences where it's like you can book a 10-minute slot with the CEO. It's like, all right, what are you going to get out of that? Hi, how are you?
Well, and
time to leave. Like,
there are people that's their style, and that, I don't want to say that clickbaity idea is what they're good at. I don't want to say it in a negative thing. There are shorter interviews that do a great job at that. It's just not my style. I'd rather be able to take the time to really understand if we really need to figure out, for example, like drill hole results. That's something that, takes time to be able to explain properly, to wrap our minds around, whatever it is, right?
Right.
But, as we're kind of talking about this, let's say this legacy machine, or the system in which the Democrats really thrive in, I was thinking about the mainstream media, that tool as it's been for them, and how that ends up kind of affecting the zeitgeist, or the perception of what's happening right now. For example, like with Trump, we've started to see over the last 2 weeks a real pullback in the markets. So how does that tool, or how do you see that tool being used to place blame for this current pullback in the markets?
Well, they're always going to use the mainstream media to place blame on the Republicans, no matter what happens. I mean, look, being objective and a realist, and again, obviously I lean right, but I don't have any like crazy allegiance to anybody politically other than myself. Can I sleep at night? That's all that really matters to me. And by the way, thank you for giving me an excuse to make the bed today, which is a huge big day for me here at the old studio apartment. But, they're going to use that machine to cast blame any which way, all day, every day. The question is, what relevance is that going to hold now? Mm-hmm. Because objectively, nobody's going to argue with you. I don't think anybody in their right mind is going to argue with you that the mainstream media machine, which started in, when we were kids in the 80s, when you had a TV with one of the twist dials, and for a generation older than this, the radio, where you had one of those TVs with the twist dial, and it went 2, 4, 6, 7, 11, PBS, and then some other like bullshit that was always static at the end. And those were your channels, right? Mm-hmm. And so that was the mainstream media machine at one point. Like you couldn't get news, you couldn't get any information unless it was coming from CBS, NBC, ABC, Fox or PIX or whatever. And that was it, And I think what the Democrats failed to realize is that wielding this power of the mainstream media machine isn't what it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago. The internet has democratized the way that people get their news, which has been fantastic if you're a fan of objective truth. It doesn't have to be about politics or COVID or the economy or anything. If you're just out there looking for objective answers, like the internet's an incredible resource because, as you're saying before, you have endless podcasts, you have endless content creators. Nowadays, everybody's a content creator now. Everybody everywhere has got something to say about everything, and then they start a thing and somebody else starts a thing and they go on each other's podcasts. It's actually like almost too much, but it's okay. The free market will work all that bullshit out. But there's no shortage of content. And so if all you're doing is looking to get all the cards on the table and then sort through them yourself to try to arrive at some type of objective truth, there's never been a better time now than ever to do that. And that's coming out of 4 years of, censorship, essentially, which the voters here in the States have rejected roundly by, overwhelmingly voting for Trump. The Democrats don't seem to understand that this shift is taking place or, that it's even already begun. Like I was saying earlier, I mean, they're kind of consistently behind the eight ball. And there's been this shift. I wrote an article on my blog like 3 years ago, just called like the mainstream media is losing the fight of its life, all thanks to Joe Rogan, right? Because he was really the first like podcast that like broke directly through, like head of the spear. Hey, we're capable of talk. Somebody else is capable of talking about these issues. He doesn't know everything, but he's kind of approaching things with a more open mind than everybody else. And, he's got the viewer base and there's demand for this. And so that should have been a signal years ago that like, hey, this is kind of moving in a different direction. Like, it doesn't matter what we have programmed George Stephanopoulos to say on Sunday morning anymore, because by virtue of this democratization and the fact that people are able to see with some clarity some very big lies that the mainstream media has perpetrated, there's been a loss of trust there that they're not going to get back. And really it kind of feels like, all these independent media creators have hit escape velocity in terms of, they're going to eventually outrun all the major broadcast stations. It's just a question of when, and it's a question of how these major broadcast organizations deploy capital to try to create some type of hybrid between, the old legacy media and the new incoming media. And I don't know what that'll look like. Maybe somebody will offer you $50 million to lock you up for 10 years in a deal that Tom Bodrovics can go on ABC. At the end of the day, your ratings and your viewership will drive the outcome. And your viewership is going to be tethered to how honestly you try to reach the objective truth, because that large center portion of both sides of the political aisle, you have your right-wing nut jobs, you have your left-wing nut jobs, but maybe a good like 70% of the electorate, of the populace there, they're all just looking for the same thing, which is some semblance of the truth, not to be lied to, honesty, security for their family. They're looking for a little bit of money, they're looking for a little bit of love, and to try to make it through this life without suffering every day. And so if you're in that meat of the bat there and your content helps people ascertain that more so than that hysterical lunatic on 60 Minutes, 6 months ago, interviewing JD Vance, or the woman defending Venezuelan gang members taking over Colorado apartment buildings. I mean, stuff like that, people can't unsee it. People can't unhear it. And when somebody is defending something like that and JD Vance says something like, hey, listen to yourself. You're arguing that it's okay because it was just one gang that took over one apartment here in the United States. Like, what are you saying? Right there. Not everybody, but a whole new group of people got it. Like, yeah, everybody has these wake up moments. Something like that happens. Like, these people are fucking out of control. Like, what the fuck is she saying? Like, what if these guys do show up at my door right now? Like, that's okay with her? That's not okay with me, you know? So you got the laptop story, you got the COVID origins, you have an innumerable amount of lies about people on the right side of the aisle. Some truth, but a lot of lies, tethered to like general hysteria, ideologies that favor feelings over facts. And it's very difficult for you to kind of cling to a lot of those people in the center. And that's where the elections are won, right? In the center. You saw that center move a little bit to the right this last one, and Trump's got a mandate. He won the popular vote. So that, I think, is media's role in kind of making all that happen. And it's really kind of funny, too, because when I was growing up, Republicans would have been the old, stuffy, dumb, white, racist fucks that like didn't understand technology. Like I always thought of Republicans as like, the 80-year-old like racist old man that couldn't program his VCR, right? And now,
and they were also typically the party that was cheering for more conflict.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And now you look at somebody like, I don't know, throw a dart, right? Pelosi, right? Like she doesn't understand podcasts and their effect on, political campaigning, other than she got her candidate got her ass whooped in the election. And there's something there that she's probably like, well, we did something wrong. I don't know what it is. But she's not sitting at home, like doing her own podcast. Even this thing with, rolling out Gavin Newsom. I mean, it's just so sad. They're like, all right, Gavin Newsom's going to start a podcast now. And he's bringing on Charlie Kirk and these people on the right, who, by the way, are like decimating him on his own podcast. But like, hey, we're just going to show people like we're hip, we're with it, we can talk to the other side. It's like, yeah, you're the guys that didn't even like, you were scared shitless to go on Joe Rogan. You needed all your interviews edited. You had ground rules for everything that you were doing during campaigning. Trump and Vance are like, hey, here's our values. We believe in them. Run the camera. We'll go as long as you want, and you can't fake that because it rests on just having better policies, like limited government. A lot of like right-leaning policies are just, in my opinion, they're just better. And so they're easier to defend. You don't have to be embarrassed to defend them. You don't need a focus group to tell you who they will and won't piss off. And you don't need, a public relations team there every time you want to say something, because you just come by it honestly. Mm-hmm. So to me, that seems so much easier. Back to my point real quick though, like, Republicans kind of used to be the people that like, I thought were out of touch. Like you said, they used to be pro-war, right? They were the war hawks. Now it's like they were the rich fucks, right? Like now the Democrats are the fucking rich elites. They're the ones with like a shitload of money. They're the ones that are out of touch. They're the ones that are fucking old and don't get it anymore. They're the ones clinging to this, I said it before on your podcast and say it again. Democrats had some great years. They really did. They had a couple of great decades. They balanced the budget. They did a lot for civil rights. They did a lot for equality. They did a lot for, but just because you had some success over a period of time moving left, what they've done is just adopted to move left no matter the consequence as their policy. We just have to keep going. And keep going, because 1980 to 2004 was a success, or whatever it was, where they had some glory years. They say, okay, let's just keep. They never just say, all right, let's just park the bus. Like we got the winning recipe right here. And so they've gotten too far left. Meanwhile, the Republicans have kind of, I don't know. There's not a lot. I don't think that has changed in the Republican Party over like 30 years. I think they've always kind of been for like limited government. This peace through strength thing that Trump pushes is a little bit different than the war hawks of the early 2000s. But yeah, I think that they thought they were going to have the mainstream media forever. They thought that the prescription was always go left, regardless of the consequence. And now here they are. They're the old rich fucks moving in the wrong direction, flinging with their like lifeless hands to this dying media behemoth that is like in a drunken stupor and is about to fall over. So they haven't adapted at all. And there's the results.
Chris, as you're explaining this, I listened to a podcast with Grant Williams the other day. And I've brought this idea up countless times with friends, both on the show and in private. And it's this idea of, especially as content creators, I think we see it a lot more than most people do. And it's the idea that you really want to be able to hold two competing ideas in your head at the same time and evaluate each for its merits. Again, going back to this idea of seeing this more as content creators, you really get, if somebody disagrees with the guest or disagrees with what somebody's saying, you get this, over the top reaction that says, oh, this person's an idiot and I've stopped listening as soon as they said X or Y. And it's like, you're missing the point. The point is to build a tapestry with these different viewpoints and say, I'm going to sit back and I'm not going to emotionally react to what this person is saying. I'm going to take, 2 or 3 pieces of what they said, consider it, and then figure out where that links up and where I agree with that data as they're seeing it. Because again, going back to this idea that we need more sets of eyes and ears to be able to help us understand what's going on, because there is just a tidal wave of content right now and news, and everything is happening. Probably most of it isn't worth actually paying attention to, but this idea that you can not emotionally react to something and just listen to an idea that you might disagree with and figure out, maybe I was thinking about that the wrong way. I really hope that podcasts and long form content and, these more, let's say, honest brokers have the ability to, I hope that they are moving people in that direction of being able to build that skill and understand that, very likely everybody is going to come to a more balanced view in the middle. That's my hope anyway.
Well, that's like with anything in life. So look, the investing world, right, which you talk about and, I've been involved with for a long time. When and we've talked about this before, when you go to invest in a company, say you want to get long a company, if I want to get long a company, I must know the best short case against that, right? So find me the guy who's short 10 million of the equity and tell me what his thesis is, because a lot of this comes back to psychological, people responding with their feelings, and you can go a whole other direction with that into unprocessed trauma and all this other bullshit. There's a lot of that there. Ego plays a big role in it. But if you're investing in something, like the ideal situation is you drop the ego, you think to yourself, I could be wrong, and then you say, give me the best case against what I'm thinking. Mm-hmm. Then you weigh both sides of that coin, right? Here's the best investor in the world who's short, and here's me with my long case. Okay, so how do we make these fucking pieces fit, right? Like, who's right about total addressable market? Who's right about the growth potential and the pro formas? Who's right about which direction the industry's going in? And then you try to mishmash some objective truth out of that, and that goes for anything. It goes for, I was listening to some of my favorite things to listen to are these debates on Fringe, when you get people who know the environment well. For example, Joe Rogan had Graham Hancock and Flint Dibble at one point, Clint Dibble's an archaeologist. Graham Hancock is kind of a fringe. They call him a pseudoscientist a little bit, but he's got a lot of fringe theories with very little direct or primary source evidence, a lot of circumstantial evidence about, lost cities and Atlantis and all this other bullshit. And so Rogan puts them together and says, okay, hash it out. And so here you have this guy who's kind of walking around saying, hey, here's a lot of things that may have happened with a lack of kind of direct primary source evidence, and a real archaeologist who is able to accurately hit those points head on. There was another one with Eric Weinstein and Mick West, which I thought was great, talking about, the UAP phenomenon and stuff like that, which is Mick West, super fucking smart, skeptic when it comes to the paranormal and UAPs, UFOs. Eric Weinstein, who is a theoretical mathematician and, expert in whatever differential geometry or whatever, astrophysics, coming head to head to talk about what's the actual evidence that we have that there's anything out there. And so when you do things like that, and this could be in any topic, it can be, where to buy a house. It could be anything. When you find people that are tuned in and have a good, cogent argument, articulate points to make on one side or the other, the way that you're going to ultimately, hopefully, arrive at what's best for you is by dropping the ego and objectively trying to look at both sets of points and say, okay, where's the evidence? Where's the irrefutable, where's the terminus here in terms of what can and cannot be proven? And that requires a little bit of perception. It requires a little bit of dropping the ego, as I was saying, and a willingness to engage in that kind of dialogue. And that is the difference between, somebody like Joe Rogan, who will have Peter Hotez on and Peter McCullough on, right? Two totally different voices, as it relates to COVID and the vaccines, right? Or he'll have Sanjay Gupta on and he'll have Pierre Corey on, two completely opposite ends of the spectrum. Big difference between that and a woman on CNN, like Dana Bash, again, to bring up JD Vance, interviewing JD Vance, who, when she starts getting an answer that she doesn't like, starts interrupting him. And start, I'm not saying that, and there's been so many of those instances. Go back to some of the debates this last cycle with David Muir stepping in. No one is interrupting Joe Biden the entire debate. Trump starts talking about something that a moderator decides isn't factual, or it's just not fucking convenient to be aired on national television for them and their party. And they step in and they try to squelch one set of arguments. And most of the populace has gotten wise to that. They've kind of figured that cat is out of the bag, man. They know, because I was never a media, an anti-media conspiracy theorist, in the 2010s. I started a podcast because Peter Schiff used to be on TV. Then he wasn't anymore. And I was like, well, maybe if I start a podcast, I can interview him. And then in 2014, Bill Fleckenstein was invited on CNBC and asked his opinion on the markets, and then was ridiculed by Tim Seymour for suggesting that gold, which was 1,200 or 1,300 at the time, would eventually go to 2,000, and that the Japanese bond market would crack up. And fucking voila, it's 10 years later, but gold is at 3,000 and the Japanese bond market is cracking up. So that is the kind of shit that pisses me off, because Tim Seymour fucking laughed him off the air, and it got to a point where it was contentious. The interview's out there. It's on YouTube. You can find it. Because he didn't like what this dude was saying, or because past performance was not going to be indicative of the future results that he was potentially putting out there, or it didn't fit the narrative he liked. And lo and behold, 10 years later, it turns out he was right. It just took some time. And so people are getting wise to that, and I feel like that same kind of awakening is going to happen, I think, as it relates to macro and as it relates to markets too. All this shit that people have been bringing up about why this perpetual QE system doesn't work, and why debasing the dollar, doesn't work, and why endless money printing doesn't work. Like, that is really kind of grabbed hold here. The Bitcoin people actually have done a great job, because it's a younger generation that have been forced to learn kind of how monetary policy works that I don't think normally would otherwise. But they've really kind of got their hooks in there. And that's another thing. We're not there yet, but you can kind of see it like in little bits and pieces of like what Scott Bessent says. And you kind of got Judy Shelton out there floating around a little bit. She's not in the administration, but she's talking to people, and the libertarians are out there. Ron Paul's out there. I mean, Rand Paul and Ron Paul are still out there, kind of adding their thing. You got a couple of sitting senators or House reps, I forget who, still trying to, even though it's just for show at this point, introduce end the Fed type resolutions and laws, or whatever they call them, continuing resolutions or whatever. And so it's out there. It's just a matter of time. Just like the media's bullshit was out there 15 years ago, but we weren't quite ready to kind of feed them a shit sandwich back, which is what happened in this last election.
Mm-hmm. But, you bring up this idea of Fleckenstein saying the Japanese bond market was going to blow up and that gold was going to go to $2,000 or $3,000. And you recently wrote an article kind of talking about this idea that us Austrian economists or the students of Austrian economics have been wrong and are at best maybe considered broken clocks right twice a day. So do you think that day of reckoning is coming for the economy that really reimposes these laws of the Austrian school versus this MMT dreamland that we've been living?
Well, it's coming, and in some ways has happened already. The only question is, what does that look like? If the people in charge pull any and all strings that they can to try to make nominal stock market prices go higher, does that mean that we're wrong if gold is at $10,000 an ounce at the same time? Like, no, it just means that they're window dressing things, and the consequence blow-off valve has happened elsewhere in the market. And so whether it's the widening of the inequality gap, which is accelerating the more QE that we do, or it's the price of gold and real estate and fixed assets going higher, or it's prices moving higher faster than incomes are moving higher. All of those are negative consequences that people are less likely to understand than they are if stocks just go down, mm-hmm. right? And so, I think in a lot of ways we've been right. On a nominal basis, anybody that's ever told you to buy gold ever in all of recorded human history, as long as we've ever existed, has been right. Mm-hmm. Gold's at like an all-time high in US dollars right now, right? And so anybody that's ever told you to buy gold over the last 100 years on a nominal basis has been right. Up to like today, like we're at the margin right now, like $3,005 an ounce, right? So we're there. So does that mean we've been wrong? Like, when most of us are just arguing, hey, like this is a monetary system that at some point the path is going to get so narrow that there's not really going to be a path. Mm-hmm. No, I think that makes us right. Like if the S&P goes from 6,000 to 10,000 this year, but gold goes from 3,000 to 30,000, like, does that make us wrong? Like, I don't know. The point is the fucking thing's broken, and that the only solution they have is printing money. And every time they print money, things get made worse. Mm-hmm. And so if you look at something like, I wish I had the chart, but if you look at something like the inequality gap between the top, you have something like I'm going to draw it here for you real quick. You have something like the top, like the bottom 90%, and then you have like the top 10%, and then you have like the top 1%. and it looks like this. This is like if you look at the like inequality gap right now, you have the bottom like 90%. Okay, so this is everybody. This is most people, right? And this is probably like the 60s here. Here's your top 1%, and here's your top 10%. The more money we print, the further the top 10% gets from the bottom 90%. And the more money we print, the further the top 1%. So all we're doing by printing money to boost up financial assets is consolidating more power to really the top 10%, but ultimately the top 1%. Now, that is not a system working. That is a system transferring purchasing power and power in general from the have-nots to the haves. And in quick fashion, that accelerates every time we print more money. And so if our only solution, like when the market tanks this go round, the solution is going to be lower rates and printing more money, we're making that problem worse. So does it matter if it blows up, in a way where everybody can point and say, something bad happened? Or if we just continue down this insane path until people will be forced to understand exactly what's happening? They're getting it a little with inflation now, because inflation's run so rampant that like people go to the store and they're like, Fruit Loops, $10, bad. I don't know why this is happening or how this is happening, but something about this doesn't fucking gel with me, because cereal used to be $5 and now it's 10 and I'm getting less, right? So maybe that's when like, okay, they go pick up a Thomas Sowell book for like the first time ever. It'll take a while for that kind of stuff to sink in. And that's, again, I've argued before in setting your podcast before, that's what makes this whole system so nefarious. It's a broken system that doesn't work for the average person, but it's cloaked in so much jargon and bullshit and complexities, that the average person who is busy being a productive member of society and, cleaning storm drains for a living, or roofing, or laying bricks, or running a small business, or being a dermatologist, that average person doesn't have time to sit down and sort through the complexities of how the Fed works with the Treasury, and they just know, hey, can I afford this or can I not afford this? They're telling me things are good, but it feels like things are bad. When stocks go down, I can see things are bad, and then things are bad. Like, I can't pay off my credit card. My mortgage got more expensive this month. Rates are up. I don't know why rates are up. Like, it can't be, And so you have the Fed and the Treasury trying to work the gas and the brake at the same time, raising rates to try to quell inflation, but also at the same time, like, essentially bankrupting discretionary spending from the average American. And you have prices that are out of control. So, it's an unenviable position for the Treasury Secretary and the Fed chair, because, as I've said for years, I really do believe they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Ultimately, I don't think they'll allow some type of deflationary depression. I think that we'll have a sharp, probably sell off in assets, and then I think the Fed will step in, and then it'll be back to the old plan again. And things like the inequality gap will widen. Prices may get further out of reach for the everyday person. Their purchasing power may be stripped from them further and in different ways. Their quality of life, which is another lever that people don't notice, quality of life comes down, right? So another thing about this nefarious system is that the stock market could be going to all-time highs, but people can't get a customer service representative on the phone at their bank, and to them, it's kind of like this peccadillo during the day, just like, well, they're really kind of slacking on this. Or, I was trying to get some answers on a package from FedEx a couple days ago. And talk about pissing into the wind, man, between the AI assistants and the people that don't speak English and the people I could get on the phone that ultimately couldn't help me. It was just an incredible waste of an hour. I actually had the same experience with the people at Lovesack. I was trying to, kept fucking up, mailing my shit to the wrong address. Which is 30 years ago would have been an easy problem. 1-800-LOVESACK. Hello. what do you have as my address? Well, we have 250 North, 3rd Street. Okay, I'm 250 South Arch Street. You got it fucked up, right? Can you just change north to south? Oh, okay. Thanks, Mr. Irons. Thanks. Bye. Click. Now it's like, press 1 if you're having a brain hemorrhage. Press 2 if you root for the Yankees. Press 3 if you got a clubbed foot. Like, it's just like, what is going on? People don't notice that, right? I wrote this article 6 months ago or a year ago called "The Degradation and Humiliation of the U.S. Consumer." And the point is, like, the shopping experience, the in-store shopping experience now, right? I need to go get toothpaste yesterday. So I walk into Walgreens and I got to walk up to a biometric safe with the toothpaste in it. Then I got to hit a button like I'm a rat looking for a fucking food pellet somewhere in some kind of lab experiment, right? Ding. Yes. I need toothpaste. And then I move down the aisle. I need shampoo. Ding. Yes. I need toothpaste to also wash my hair. And I'm walking through the store. Ding, 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 ding. Like a fucking hamster on a wheel. That. And then I get this shit to the front of the store and I got to ring it up anyways. And by the way, you're on camera. That's the other thing too. They got a nice big camera there. Like, don't fuck up. You're on camera. Do not steal. Monitoring in progress. And I'm just like, oh my God. Like, am I being assaulted by Walgreens? Like, what's going on? And so the quality of service, the quality of life deteriorates little by little by little. And people, they don't notice it. Remember in the fucking 50s when you used to like drive your car into the gas station and it would hit the thing and it goes ding and like 9 guys would jump out like a NASCAR pit crew and they'd be like washing your windows and filling your tires. It's like, because if you buy gasoline here, you get the full service, They all had fucking hats on and, now what do? You just walk up and it's self-serve. It's kind of like that, except it just keeps going into the lower and lower quality department where things just get worse and worse to deal with. And people don't really notice that. Homes get smaller. They're built with like less sturdy material. So just quality in general. It's like here in the city. You have these great giant mansions made out of very, very huge brick and concrete up in Germantown that were made in like the 1800s or whatever. A fucking Category 5 tornado would not knock these houses down, right? And then I see the new houses going up. And it's like, a couple pieces of lumber, bang, bang, boom. And then they're laying, brick kind of like, I don't know what it's called, but like fake brick on the outside to give the appearance of bricks. When the house is made out of like, plywood and fucking, particle board probably, right? And so that's the way that we're going. And at some point, if you haven't traveled outside the U.S. lately, you may start to notice that it's our country that appears to be like a third world, more so than the places we used to joke about. I don't know. You ride the subway here in Philadelphia. It's like a demilitarized zone. People are passed out on the floor. It smells like piss. There's human excrement. I'm not making this up, man. The subway system in Philadelphia it is appallingly dirty and extremely poorly taken care of. And I love Philadelphia, but our subway is disgusting. It is fucking disgusting and it's dangerous. There's people shooting up. You cannot find a subway car without somebody passed out on it that doesn't smell like piss, that doesn't smell like shit. I'm 6'2", 200 guy. I see little women riding the subway. I'm just like, oh my God. Like if that was my daughter, like I'd lose it. Mm-hmm. And then you go to a place like Montreal. Okay. You've been to Montreal before. Okay, Quebec charges whatever, 50% in taxes or something ridiculous. But like, at least their subway is clean and it's new and it runs every 2 minutes and there's not people loitering on the platform and it's not filled with piss and shit and drug addicts. So the more you travel outside the country, right, you start to realize like, oh, all right, like our quality of life here isn't quite, we're not quite in the lead that we were globally in like coming out of World War II anymore. So to make a very long-winded point, as I do short, it's very difficult for people to see that they're being taken advantage of if the stock market keeps making a new number higher.
Mm-hmm. Well, that example of, quality of living, any of these changes, inflation, whatever it is, as it happens slowly over time. I had a guest on the show a couple years back, and on their podcast, I think it's called Words and Numbers. They bring up this idea that if you had to pay your taxes out of your full paycheck, that would give you a completely different perspective
100%
on how much taxes you're paying. The same way we could talk about inflation. And as you're explaining this, I'm like, how would that work? So if you had, let's say, price tags from a year ago or 5 years ago to now, right beside each other on the shelves, that would put in your face this idea of what is happening to the purchasing power of your dollars. And I think that would force people to consider it a lot more than they do on a daily basis, and not weirdos like you and I that are paying attention to this stuff. But you brought up
all these 1099 employees are getting it. You know what I mean? Because when you're 1099, you pay those taxes at the end of the year. And so people like Uber drivers and anybody that works in the gig economy that's getting a 1099 instead of a W-2, where taxes aren't withheld, they have a tax bill at the end of the year. And then it becomes very, very real to them. It's very easy with the W-2 as they're paying taxes for you. You see it accrue on your pay slip, but you get the net pay. And so you're kind of starting with what you're allowed to keep. But if you're a 1099 employee and you make $60,000 a year as an Uber driver, and you're using every last penny of that as the year progresses to make your rent and support your family and buy your groceries, and you file your taxes, and at the end of the year, you owe the government $15,000 and you have only $5,000 saved up, well, now you have a fucking huge problem, And so, and then obviously branching out from there is people see how their tax money is spent. And that's something that the more you get in education about, the profit motive and behavioral incentives, it doesn't have to be, I know they're saying like, oh, Doge lied about some of these numbers, 3 million, 30 million, 300 million, 3 billion, 30 billion. It doesn't matter. Like, why are we sending fucking, why are we sending like
$10 million to
activist books to, Ghana? It's just like, where did I sign up for that when I started paying income tax? Like the shit here at home doesn't fucking work. Like the subway is disgusting. Can we start there? And then I got to sit and I got to watch San Francisco clean up for Xi Jinping to show up, which they apparently can clean the whole city up in, 2 days. And then 362 days a year, I got to sit there and have it look like shit just because this communist isn't coming over here. And, it's beyond absurd. And you start to notice a trend after a while that every time cash is doled out from the government, whether it's a contract to build a new subway system, or it's to repave the roads, or it's for one of these NGOs, or it's going to the Department of Education, or it's going to wherever, anytime the government doles out money, there's waste. There's people getting paid more than they should be to do what they're doing, and they're doing it less efficiently than they would be doing it otherwise if they were in the private sector, because there's no profit motive. So by definition, government spending is for the most part wasteful. Defense spending is a little bit of a different situation you can talk about, but even in defense spending, years ago, there was one of the short sellers did a report on TransDigm. I think it was Citron, talking about, the government paying $10,000 for little screws for certain things that otherwise would cost $29 to get at Home Depot, like that kind of shit. Mm-hmm. And people know they can gouge the government because they know that the government's not paying attention. It's like the insurance companies do. It's like I'm sure the defense companies do. So knowing all of that, and once you get some type of understanding of that, it should only be common sense to argue that the government should do the least amount necessary and do the least amount of spending possible, and that we should privatize everything else. A great example I always bring up is like FedEx versus the post office, right? You look at like FedEx and UPS versus the post office. Now here in Philadelphia, the FedEx drivers, they all have uniforms. They all drive nice FedEx trucks. My shit gets here on time. It's got a tracking number. Everything's in somewhat of an order, even though I had an issue with their customer service the other day. But compare that with the Postal Service, which has reached such a level of mismanagement that you have people driving around in what appear to be their family-owned vehicles. So if you come to the city, you'll notice somebody in like a Subaru Outback with like a little magnet on the side that says U.S. Postal Service. And in the back, they'll have the mail, but then they'll also have like their fucking golf clubs and like other stuff. And you're just like, is this guy using his personal vehicle to deliver the mail? Most of them aren't wearing uniforms. Some of them wear, and listen, my dad was a letter carrier, so I give them an immense amount of respect. It's not an easy job. It's a grind. Totally get it. But I'm just talking about the mismanagement. Why can FedEx have their shit together enough so that everybody's got a clean truck, everybody's got a nice uniform, and everybody has what they need to get the job done, and it gets done efficiently? But the Postal Service kind of feels like this fucking free-for-all, where people are driving around their family-owned vehicles, and sometimes the stuff gets there, and sometimes it doesn't, and, because the Postal Service has no profit motive. Every year they lose $1 billion or $2 billion or whatever it is. I guess you could argue, okay, that's nice. It's a nice service that the government provides for everybody because stamps are only whatever they are, 50 cents. And some people that are on lower budgets need the Postal Service. They can't spend $19 on a FedEx envelope every time they want to mail something. But, the reason that the Postal Service loses money every year and FedEx makes money every year is FedEx has shareholders. They have people they're accountable to, and they have a profit motive. And the Postal Service is like, well, if we don't make any more money, the government will just give it to us. They'll fill the gap somehow. And so you see the deteriorating quality in the Postal Service and the terrible financials. And you see a company like FedEx that's got their shit together a little bit more and is making money. Same industry, doing essentially almost the same service. The Postal Service does provide more on the lower end, first class mail, things like that. But really kind of in the same area, one who's outperforming, crushing it, appears to have their shit together, and the other that looks like they couldn't fucking hit sand if they fell off a camel. So that's the difference between government capital outlay and the private sector capital outlay. And anytime anybody argues, we can't privatize air traffic control, or we can't privatize the paving of who's going to pave the roads, Tom? Like, we can't find a bunch of fucking Goombas here in South Philly to pave the roads that we need paved. You hand them a couple of bucks, you do it South Philly style. You hand them an envelope full of cash. Here you go. We need 3rd Street paved, done and done. Mm-hmm. So anybody that argues against it, they don't really understand like the profit incentive, the profit motive, and that obviously in the private sector you have a motive to be more efficient and more productive than you do when the government is just kind of covering their eyes and handing out money. Here you go, some for you, some for you, some for you. By the way, we hope the shit gets done and the line isn't too long at the VA or the DMV, but it probably will be because we don't have any shareholders or anybody to be accountable to. Just the government who's got a printing press that gives us unlimited money regardless of the consequences. Thank you.
Well, I think that's a really important point because, we see whether it's people on the left, whether it's people on the right, whether it's people in the center, everybody's okay with cutting spending as per Doge is trying to do until it starts to take aim at their program that they benefit from. Like this idea that we need to cut spending, everybody seems to agree with that. Yet when it's actually pointed at a program for hungry children or a program for vets or whatever it is, all of a sudden everybody gets their back up against the wall and Trump and Elon and Doge are the worst thing possible. But like, we have to remember that to enact some change, to be able to bring change and some discipline to this spending, we need to break some of these programs and put them under review until we can figure out the importance of them and if they're worth spending all this money on.
They're worth what we're laying out for them, right? And again, you have to hold two ideas in your head at once, right? Mm-hmm. This is what we were talking about earlier, because when you end something called USAID, US aid, oh, why are you ending that? You don't want to help people? It's like, no, we want to help people. We want to help the country. We need to get the country back on its feet. Mm-hmm. Like you said, we have to get serious about how we're spending. We have to put this in review. We have to take a hard look at things. And a lot of times, I know it's not a fucking convenient fact for most people, but a lot of times things have to get worse before they can get better. And that's the way that it is in markets. It's the way that it is in economics. And it's the way that it is in life in general. To be frank with you, I got 110 days off alcohol today, right?
Congrats, Chris.
And so, thanks, dude. And so, how shitty did I have to feel about drinking before I finally said I'm done with this?
Yep.
At least for 110 days. I've drank for 20 years. Mm-hmm. How ashamed of myself did I have to become before I said, all right, let's just try not to do it. Let's try to break this pattern, which isn't easy, there's a saying in recovery, taking the elevator all the way down to the bottom. And you have to do that with a lot of things in life. And sometimes it is uncomfortable. And sometimes it does take courage. And sometimes you do have to hold two ideas in your head at the same time, like you're talking about, which is just because we want to review how the VA is spending doesn't mean we want homeless veterans to die. What it means is that hopefully in the future, we can be more efficient and get more out of our money spent, whether it's through the government or whether it's privatizing things or whatever, that will raise the quality of life. So just as people don't notice it on the way down, it's very tough for people to conceptualize, quality of life as it starts getting better, because as you're saying, when somebody gets laid off from USAID and their job was to feed children in Bangladesh or whatever it was, that immediately pulls on their heartstrings. It immediately pulls on them and their, kind of dignity, hey, you might not have a job anymore. I see people posting on Twitter, we just lost our grant to study whatever, manatees in their natural habitat or whatever it is, that's it's not an especially comfortable thing. And it takes it takes somewhat of a deep thinker to kind of make peace with that as a function of eventually, hopefully, making things better. I just don't understand how anybody can look at the fiscal situation that the country's in and not think that massive cuts aren't warranted. We're out of control fiscally, and the country is heading for, what do you do when interest on the national debt is higher than defense spending? And, we can't default on our debt, and we can't print our way out of it so much so that we, spark hyperinflation. So again, how do we work the gas and the brake at the same time here? And it's difficult. And in life, things are difficult, and difficult things take courage and they take deep thinking to deal with. And sadly, the way that we've managed monetary and fiscal policy in our country for so long has conditioned people to assume that they are entitled to feel comfortable at all times. And this has been another negative consequence of the way that the Fed has managed things over the last 20 or 30 years that we don't really see, because it happens very, very, very slowly. That every time we get into a little bit of jam, the government's there to quote unquote bail us out. And that's it. 2008. Oh, hey, we never really paid the price for 2008. We had a small disruption. We had an area where we thought, okay, the entire contagion of the entire global economy could be at risk. And then there was a huge bailout, and the government, they saved the banks, and they saved AIG, and they saved the automakers, and so everybody's like, oh, okay, government to the rescue. And the same thing in 2020. I mean, 2020 was bizarre because we shut the entire economy down and then tried to, like they say in Mythbusters, reject your reality and substitute our own. They just papered over the whole economy with printed money. They're like, all right.
That's the perfect example for gas and brake at the same time. All brakes on the economy and full gas on the printing side.
Right. And then everybody's like, got this huge fucking mystery about where all this inflation came from. Mm-hmm. It's bizarre. And so what that's doing is it's conditioning people to believe that there's always going to be an exit. Mm-hmm. And, on my blog, I just wrote an article last week or 2 weeks ago. It's called "The Next Market Crash Will Break Our Fragile Brains." And the point of the argument is we have been so conditioned to be comfortable that the more conditioned to be comfortable we get, the less discomfort it takes for people to really slip into like a dangerous psychosis. And we saw some of this with COVID. I mean, you still see it now, people out in public wearing masks, freaking out about, social distancing. Still, it's 5 years later, and we know that this thing isn't deadly. And some people are just broken. Like they're just not coming back. They're like, okay. The same thing will happen financially with people. And it's going to, it's like this thing with somebody trying to assassinate Trump. Like the media had conditioned people over the course of 10 years, so much so to believe that this guy is the literal Antichrist. Mm-hmm. And there have, people that I have spoken to about him say he does not have one redeeming quality as a human being. Not one. That's the kind of shit that people say to me when we talk about him. And there's a lot of things about him I don't like. There's a lot of ways he conducts himself that I don't conduct myself personally, right? But when I say that there's not one, that he doesn't have one redeeming quality, like, nah, I'm sure he does. Like at the very least, like he's taking care of his family financially. You know what I mean? He's a grinder. He's a businessman. You can call him whatever you want. You can call him a shark. You can call him a scumbag. You can call him, a grifter, but his family's set financially, right? So, okay, like maybe there's one redeeming quality, right? Like, so it's that kind of like hypnosis that people get into that leads you to something like what happened in Butler, where some young kid has just listened to this over and over and over, like how the world's going to end if this guy becomes president, and just says like, all right, I'll take things into my own hands here. And it's that same type of like conditioning as it relates to the economy that I think is just going to break people. Like, and it could be, I don't know, and I'm not predicting this, but like it could be now. Like we could be on the verge of that, like of that pullback in markets now that could do that. I mean, we don't know. At some point, the Fed's going to act, and it's not going to do what everybody thinks it's going to do. And at some point, like there's so much additional leverage in the market now. I point out a couple things in my blog. One is that whatever you think about crypto, there is a case. I like how it does that thumbs up there. I do that. All right, let's try this. One is crypto. No, one is crypto, right? Which you could, if you wanted to, you could argue is like a $3 or $4 trillion complete air pocket, right? Mm-hmm. Let's just give them the benefit of the doubt and say Bitcoin survives with a $2 trillion market cap. There's at least $2 trillion in air there and other bullshit in the crypto market, okay? So that's a layer of fucking icing you have right there. Then you have the equity market that, in my opinion, is being driven by the passive bid, right? Which will disappear as jobs start to fall off. And people have less money to contribute to their 401ks. And is also being, it is also the dog being wagged by the ETF and options tail, meaning that options gamma has basically replaced like actual underlying equity flows to the best that I can see. Same with ETFs. People are buying ETFs so much so that the ETFs direct the movement of the underlying instead of vice versa. It used to be more people buy Apple and the SPY ETF goes up. Now it's more people buy the SPY ETF and there's inflows into Apple as a result. When you consider that options gamma works in the opposite direction on the way down, meaning it's not just people selling, it could then be additional pressure for dealers and market makers to get short or to sell long positions as a result of selling puts. You really could have a setup here for a whipsaw, the likes of which we've never seen before. And on that, by the way, on that $2 trillion icing bubble on crypto, you can add 50, 100 times leverage, whatever people are using on that. You have a bunch of private credit marks that are probably all bullshit right now that nobody has adjusted because doing so would, absolutely cornhole the loan to value on collateral, in a cascading fashion. You have a commercial real estate market that is got arguably a big air pocket in it. You have subprime lending that is a big air pocket, autos, unsecured personal lending, all these pay as you go fucking Affirm and all this shit that people are using instead of, paying $10 for, a pack of gum and a box of potato chips. They're putting it on, 10 installments of $2 and paying $10 plus $10 in interest over the course of a year instead of all that bullshit. That's all got to get carried out. So there is a considerable amount of froth. The only question is how quickly it will cascade, when it will cascade, what the Fed's response will be, and what the timing of all that will be. But there will be a point where people are going to feel pain in a way that they didn't, they're not conditioned to. And by the way, the opposite of this, like people malfunctioning as a result of being conditioned to be comfortable, the opposite, if you want to see what I mean in practice, go read like Wall Street Bets or go read social media and look at first off, if you look at something like Wall Street Bets, nobody posts equity buys and sells. It's all options. 99 out of 100 posts on that board are people posting their options positions. So people don't even trade equities anymore. You look at social media too, look at the arrogance and the hubris that these investors post about their positions with, many of which are completely cash losing, worthless companies. Some of which, like in the quantum computing space now, we saw this with like AMC, companies like that, couldn't consistently generate cash and have since fallen 95% from highs. And in cryptos too, many of which don't provide a product or a service or generate any cash. Look at the arrogance and the hubris with which people post about those items and how certain they are that they're right. And just know that's the inverse to like how bad it's going to get on the way down, if that makes any sense to you at all.
Mm-hmm. Well, Chris, I think this kind of brings us to an interesting point. We've discussed a lot of the problems, a lot of the excesses that need to get cleaned out. Where do you think we are 4 years from now, let's say? Like as a country, as an economy, are we better off? Are we worse off? Like, how do you see this playing out? I know it's a big question, but I want to get your thoughts on it.
I really don't know, man. The Chinese say, may you live in interesting times. And I would be lying to you if I said I was doing anything other than sitting back and kind of, like meditation practitioners tell you to kind of observe without judgment. Like, man, like what's going to happen today? Because I don't really know. As it relates to this last election, there's kind of two ways to think about it. One is that the left and all their elites and the media will eventually wrestle some kind of power back. Probably would start with midterms if they can, pick up seats in Congress, I guess, and kind of slow down this machine a little bit. And there's also a very real argument for this last election being a major break and essentially, some type of, populist uprising of sorts that could last a decade or longer. I mean, and I don't really know which it's going to be. I mean, I hope I hope that that's what it is. I hope that this last election marks a profound turning point where, and again, this doesn't mean like my party has to win forever. I don't really care about that, and as it relates to politics, like if you're trying to put me on the spectrum somewhere, I'm really like, I don't think I'm that far from like center left, like what it used to be. Social issues, I'm very, very liberal on social issues. I just don't want the rights of others like infringed against their will. So like if you want to be trans, I'm fine with that. Like I completely support that. You know what I mean? Like, but if you want to try to convince a child who's 7 years old that they're trans without the parents being around and, help them start to transition without notifying the parents, like that is not okay. And so, I'd like to think that I have a lot in common with common sense Democrats. And I hope that like this election serves as kind of a whipsaw back in the right direction from where we were. We've gone so far left that like, even if we wind up here more towards the center in 10 years, we're gonna whipsaw right here, and then maybe like kind of, we'll have some elasticity back here towards some normal common sense. And I think a lot of these issues on their face are really difficult for people to defend, like I was saying earlier, like without like a PR team or without some type of like, complex jargon or word speak. Like, how are you going to let a biological male boxer get in the ring and beat the fuck out of a woman and claim that you're for like women's rights? Like, how are you going to do that? Like, how are you going to circle? It's like that Matt Walsh movie where he's just walking around asking people like, what is a woman? Like when you get down to simple questions like that and nobody can answer them, like it really kind of becomes clear that like, all right, like we may have overshot the mark here a little bit, So what I hope for is I hope that this is the start of some type of rebalance in, not just for ideologies and values, but for the country, because fiscally the country really does need that. We need a recession. We need the malinvestment to be taken out. We need some pain. We need some discomfort. It's a super inconvenient thing to say. And man, it sucks when it's you losing your job. And I'm not in any way trying to downplay that. And I'm not in any way trying to trivialize that like real people will feel real pain as a result of it. And I think this is what differentiates us from like the Chinese, for example, who I think probably take like 100-year outlook on things and really play the long game instead of, what we do, which is basically try to find a Band-Aid for tomorrow and then worry about it then. And until we start thinking differently, and it takes a lot of courage and it does create a fair amount of pain, but until we can start to kind of shift our mindset, the country is just heading in the wrong direction. And, the economy's heading in the wrong direction. The dollar's heading in the wrong direction. The country's heading in the wrong direction. So, 5 years from now, I'm hopeful that this is what's fucked up. Peter Schiff always says, like, if we had just let the banks fail in 2008, imagine where we would be today. Like 2008 to 2012 probably would have been atrocious. Probably would have been like one of the worst depressions in the country's history. But where would we be now, man? We'd probably be like 10 years into like a 50-year, upswing in the economy, a real vibrant, like free market upswing where like the worst would be over and we would be on the come up again. And so that's kind of the way you have to think about things, but we can't do that because we're just so accustomed to getting what we want when we want it and kicking the can down the road and not feeling discomfort now that it's sad, but I feel like I can't say with any confidence that, that we're going to come to terms with that in a fashion that allows us to make it happen. I just think, I think the opposite. I think, even if the politicians try not to cave, I think the people in the country will cave, and they'll do so in a way where, the other side of the aisle will make their voices heard. in, ways that are probably illegal, if you ask me, but that sadly like can't be ignored. And so, man,
But we've also been conditioned to expect that, to expect to not have to face discomfort.
What do you mean?
Well, like you brought up the idea of 2008. The Fed came in, bailed everybody out. We don't have to experience that discomfort. If you have a headache, you don't have to experience that discomfort. Go down to your Walgreens, press your rat button, get some Tylenol, whatever it is, right?
It's got nothing to do with your diet or what you're putting into the body.
Yeah.
Just take another acetaminophen pill and the headache will go away temporarily. Mm-hmm. And that, that's just not the way to fix problems long term. It's the way to put a Bandaid. But you're 100% right. Like, people are accustomed to not feeling that type of discomfort. And so we've kind of led them to this assumption that, we can kind of always make everything better. And then if we don't, it's really going to fuck some people's heads up. But the call is coming from the inside. Like, if you're like, if you have intense malaise and you're overweight and your body is, full of inflammation, like, there's a handful of things that are like genetic that you can't avoid that could be causing it. But it's also very likely that if you alter your diet and your lifestyle, like, you'll be able to remediate the problem at its source instead of taking a pill every day to try to remediate it. So, but people, they don't think like that. They want satisfaction and they want it now. And I don't know, like, I want to try to be optimistic, but it's difficult sometimes. And I think I don't know. I think that's my point there.
Well, Chris, I appreciate you coming on and giving us your viewpoint, and hopefully this does help to inform or show some people that, we do need to bring up a topic that you and I have discussed before, do need to take some personal responsibility, do need to experience some pain here, do need to exercise some discipline and some delayed gratification. And, hopefully we can get through the tough times that are coming a bit easier because we understand the value of going back to these things that have disappeared for so long.
And it's like any other type of exercise, right? You have to prepare your brain for it in some way. When COVID started, I put out a tweet that said, better to start doing some like mental exercises now and prepare yourself for what you might see in the coming year. And this was like really, really early. You can look back on my Substack at my first article. It's in there. Called like my Fringe analysis of COVID or something. But like in 2019 or very early 2020, before it was a story here in the US, I put out a tweet and just said, like, make peace in your head with, like, because I thought it could be really bad. I thought it could be like Ebola at first. And I was like, make peace with, like, maybe like duct taping your like doors shut and like seeing Tyvek suits and like, because you want your brain to be okay with that when it happens. Start thinking about it now. Start processing that now. Because like a year from now, who knows what the fucking world is going to look like. And I caught so much shit and so much ridicule for saying that. You're a fearmonger, you're this, you're that, whatever. And 2-3 years later, I mean, it was a totally different world. And so, that's the point I'm trying to make, is like the more comfortable you make yourself with being uncomfortable, the less it feels like discomfort when it occurs. Unfortunately, everybody's just being conditioned the opposite. Everybody's being conditioned to get used to comfort, which is, it's really the worst thing that you can do, to be honest with you. So
that's a Stoic philosophy as well, is the idea of practicing discomfort, practicing mentally preparing yourself for death, for, being uncomfortable, asking for a discount at the coffee shop, eating, food that costs 50 cents a day, and understanding what that actual worst case scenario is, exposing yourself to it and realizing that it's not that bad. Like that's a a practice that you can do in your life. And that applies to everything that we've talked about.
Yeah. And, the more you kind of like dig into stuff like that, the more you realize like a lot of it is up here and a lot of it's in here, and so it doesn't really matter where you live or what the bank account balance says or, all these other things. Like a lot of it really is just like, it's in your head and it's in your heart. And, you kind of just, you take it with you if you've got it. And I know it's very difficult for people to believe. I wouldn't have believed it 5-10 years ago. I would say, yeah, right. But surely be better to have more money than less. Yeah. Okay. It's better to have more money than less. But like, there's also a certain like, you can reach a certain level where like, okay, well, more doesn't really mean much. Or like, I know a lot of people that have a lot of money that are miserable. They're miserable. I sit here, I sip my coffee, I play my game of chess in the morning, or I read whatever. Man, I'm the fucking happiest guy in the world. I really am. Like, I don't need much. I got a small studio apartment, I'm not married. I don't have any kids, but like, feel pretty good just waking up, taking some deep breaths, going for a run. It's all here and it's all here. And I know people that have, for all our intents and purposes, Tom, unlimited amounts of capital, and they can't slow down enough to sit and be with themselves in a room for 5 minutes in silence because it scares the shit out of them. They don't want to look at who they are, and they don't want to, and so, yeah, I don't know. It's all in our heads and in our hearts, Tom.
Well, again, that practice of at least having a look at that, I think is really important. And it helps to be able to, as you say, be able to spend some time with yourself.
Yeah, I think it was like Carl Jung or somebody said like most of man's problems come from his inability to sit quietly in a room by himself for 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. That's really it. I think if most people could do that, like there wouldn't really be too many worries about like, annexing other countries or nuclear war or things like that. Like it's just, if people could just be at peace, weird concept, but.
All right, Chris.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that's a good place to kind of wrap up today on this, psychological and spiritual note that we've come to. Of course, for anybody that wants to read more of Chris's work, that's all available at Quoth the Raven Substack or .substack.com. Excellent blog you write and republish a lot of excellent articles, and it's another valuable counterpoint in this crazy world. Chris,
thanks,
really
dude.
Appreciate the time, man.
My pleasure.
This podcast is for general informational purposes only. Nothing on this podcast should be taken as investment advice. Guests on this show are not compensated for their appearance. Listeners are urged to educate themselves and make their own decisions. Do not base any investment decisions on the information contained. To view our full disclaimer, please visit our website.